They call me tyrant, tyrant, as if a king who governs is a monster in a crown, as if loyalty is optional, as if rebellion is a right. I gave them laws to guide them, a realm to call their own. I guarded every harbor, claimed danger as my own. And now they scratch their pamphlets, declare me enemy. My children turn against me and dare call themselves free. A monarch bears a burden that subjects never see. They take the peace I purchase and call it tyranny.
Hour 3 of this Tuesday morning on Bill Mick Live. Headline at BillMick.com. The Modesto Days. Of course, Dave Bowman, that's where he and I got acquainted. And before we get to Dave Does History, Dave, just a couple of things we didn't really get a mention as we talked about the Modesto Days. That Bill Mick Live logo that we see prominently on Dave's screen as this thing is being recorded, created by Dave Bowman. Nice job, Dave. That's just going to stay that way, you know?
Yeah, it's just another one of my myriad of talents.
It is.
By the way, I did a 25th anniversary one too. So
yeah, and that was pretty cool. I've got a copy of it too. So thank you very much. That's kind of neat. Might have that printed up one of these days and say, hey, let's just throw this around somewhere. But nonetheless, we'll get to more of your roasts tomorrow on the show. Today, we are going to focus for the rest of the day on Dave Does History. And Dave, we're looking at the perfect villain for the American Revolution. And let's define perfect villain as we get started, huh?
That's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because what makes a perfect villain? If you're talking about literature or film or those kinds of things, it's hard to put a finger on. We all have our favorite villains, Snidely Whiplash, or whatever. Darth Vader, Khan. Yeah. But even those villains, they're not perfect villains. Darth Vader's a great example. Darth Vader is not the perfect villain because he knows that he's the bad guy. The perfect villain is someone who not only doesn't know that he's the bad guy. That's one of my favorite movies, Falling Down with Michael Douglas. That's the last line in the movie. Wait, I'm the bad guy? How did that happen?
Yeah.
He not only doesn't know that he's the bad guy, he or she or it think that they're the good guy, that they're the ones that are right. That's what makes a really perfect villain. And that's why when we look at the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, it's so important from our viewpoint to really, I don't like the word, but denigrate, but really make George III not just the bad guy, but he is villainous. He is evil. If you look at George III in our history, there's nobody in our world on this side of the Atlantic that looks at George III and thinks, yeah, he was a good guy. That's not the way the rest of the world sees him, by the way. There's a historical parallel to this in Herod the Great. Herod the Great, if you ask most Americans what they think of Herod the Great, what do they go to? They go
he killed
to
Jesus.
He didn't kill Jesus, but he tried to.
He wanted to.
He killed a bunch of other babies, right? I mean,
yeah.
And yet that literally comes from a few verses in one chapter of one gospel. That's where your entire viewpoint of him comes from. History sees Herod the Great much differently. Herod the Great, while the Jews didn't necessarily like him, they respected him. And in fact, in the Talmud it says, you have never seen a beautiful building until you've seen the building, the temple that Herod built. That's how much they regard him. Most people don't recognize this, but Herod the Great was a contemporary of Octavian, Cleopatra, and Mark Antony. He was deeply involved in that little conflict between those. You've all seen Cleopatra, I hope, or read Shakespeare. And because of geography, Herod the Great was actually on the side of Antony and Cleopatra, who, by the way, lost to Octavian, who you know as Augustus Caesar. And you'll notice that Herod the Great, unlike Mark Antony and Cleopatra, didn't die. He didn't lose his job. He actually got in a boat, sailed to Rome, and said to Augustus, to Caesar, Octavian, look, don't worry about whose friend I was. Look at how good of a friend I was to them, and I can be just as good of a friend to you. And Octavian said, you're right, go back and keep being king of over there.
So he was a good politician.
He's a good politician.
Yeah.
And he never saw himself as the bad guy. He always saw himself as being the best of what he was trying to be. And this is what you're looking for in a villain. This is why King George III doesn't see himself as a tyrant, even though we're trying to portray him as we keep using that word, tyrant, tyranny. He really, we're told that that really chafed him, because he doesn't see himself as a tyrant. He sees himself as being a responsible king. He's holding together a very fragile empire. He sees himself as very serious. George III always saw himself as being very dutiful to his job, very serious about it. He viewed the crown as a profound obligation, not just a privilege. He was keenly aware of the heavy responsibilities that he had, and he was committed to order, which he believed stability was the ultimate virtue for a fragile global empire. This is not the caricature that most people expect, and this is not the person that we think we know.
And we learn more when we continue in 60 seconds on WMMB. Dave, I don't care if it was George III or any other monarch of the era, as that British Empire was continuing to grow and expand, I cannot imagine how tough that would have been to try to manage all of that. And from so far away with no communication that was instant at all.
No, and it's a system that is surprisingly resilient and surprisingly actually works. England is a unique empire in the world. It's the first truly mercantile empire. It's not an empire that's conquering lands just to conquer lands. They're conquering places or taking over places to make money. And everything in the English idealism here is about how do we control trade. This is why the laws say that, all the American products have to go to England before they can be sold somewhere else, and vice versa. All the molasses has to go from the Caribbean to England to America. All these things are control elements for a mercantile empire, which doesn't necessarily need instantaneous military communication. By the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, and George comes to the throne in 1760, the very first thing he does when he comes to the throne is he does away with a council, a special private council that his grandfather, George II, had that helped him manage colonial affairs in America. He immediately dismisses all of those people. So his very first action seems to be, I'm going to take over the colonies and run them my way. But what he has found is the nation is deeply in debt. We've talked about how much debt the English had. He's trying to manage a global empire. And from his perspective, where he is sitting in London, he is seeing an empire that's being protected by his troops, his navy, his will. And he's having to manage this debt and this global empire. He looks across the ocean and he sees these colonies which are prosperous. By all measurement, the American colonies were prosperous. But in his mind, they're not paying their fair share of this whole thing. Parliament is actually the people that set the policies. They actually pass the laws, but it's the king that has to actually enforce them. And this is a little bit different than the way things are done back in England. The colonies are not subject to some elements of the English Constitution. They are more direct ruled by the king than by Parliament. The British public are looking at this going, wait, these colonies aren't paying a lot of taxes. We are. We're being crushed, significantly higher taxes. The merchants, the people in London and in England itself are very suspicious of the colonials, the American colonials, and the fact that they're just not paying what we are paying. But they're also getting more government than we're getting. There's also this belief in parliamentary supremacy, that what Parliament says is absolute. And they believe in this idea, this accepted British legal standard, that Parliament represents the entire empire, regardless of who actually casts the ballot. This is known as virtual representation. This idea that despite the fact that we don't have any representation in Parliament, it doesn't matter to them because, by definition, Parliament is supreme. Sounds bizarre to us. I mean, we look at that and go, well, who would go for that? But in the 1760s and into the 1770s, this isn't just an accepted system. This is a system that is well understood and, for all practical purposes, is working. So what causes this whole thing to start breaking down? What causes this whole thing to go from we're part of this to all of a sudden we're fracturing apart from this? From the view in London, this isn't tyranny, it's discipline. But from America's viewpoint, that same discipline begins to feel very different. And who's causing it? And why are they causing it? And the problem is going to build and build and build, of course, until we get to the point where the colonials are pointing the fingers not at Parliament, but directly at George III and saying he's the reason, he's the cause, he's the tyrant, he is the villain.
Apparently, they made a pretty good case about it. We will explore that as Dave Does History continues here on Bill Mick Live. It's a Tuesday morning on 92.7 FM WMMB, where the Space Coast talks.
This is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
Nice to have you along with us on a Tuesday morning, and this is what we always do on Tuesdays. Dave Does History, looking at the perfect villain, and the king doesn't see himself that way. Pretty sure the Brits don't see him that way. Not even all of the colonials see him that way, but yet that image is being painted. Dave, how do they put this all together, my friend?
That's an interesting idea, isn't it? That a lot of the colonials, about a third of the colonials, remain loyalists, Tories. They don't see it in this way. And that's Thomas Paine's idea. You've had this king for so long that you've just accepted it as reality. You've never really thought about it. But there you go. Of course, the British never will accept this. Even in recent years, this book, see how thick that is. It's called The Last King of America, and it's a biography of George III, The Misunderstood Reign of George III by Andrew Roberts. It's a fascinating book, but I will tell you that it is definitely written from an English perspective, and it doesn't see things the way you see them or I see them, and it ridicules American ideals as being insane. I mean, clearly the king wasn't these things. But we weren't just complaining about King George III. We began to construct a case that King George III was, in fact, a tyrant. By 1776, and we've covered all of the things that developed in there, so I'm not going to rehash all that. It's important to understand that this whole thing is not about taxes. The king keeps coming back to you're not paying your fair share. We keep trying to explain to him this is not about taxation. The whole thing with the Boston Tea Party, because you'll get people today who will say, well, they were stupid for doing that because that tea was cheaper than the smuggled tea they were drinking. We understand that. It's not about the taxes. It's about the power and whether or not that power has limits. We're not just complaining about our wallets. We're constructing a fundamental legal case that power must have boundaries. When you read the Declaration of Independence, you can read it as really three phases, if you will. It is a formal accusation. It's an itemized indictment of specific crimes that the king has committed against the colonies. It is a public argument made to the entire world. Let candid facts be submitted. It's designed to persuade both the local populace and foreign powers of the righteousness of our cause. And it's a justification. It provides the precise, legal, moral groundwork required for breaking away from a sovereign. This is not something that happens every day in the real world. I mean, think about how many nations up to that point had ever said to a king, yeah, we don't need you anymore. We don't agree with you. You don't have this power. It had never happened. Sure, there had been revolts, but not for the reasons that we were making, which was that there are limits on power, not control. These were completely different times, completely different ideals. And to this day, based on this book, I really don't think the British still don't actually understand that.
And we pick it up in 30 seconds on Bill Mick Live. So, Dave, as you've been telling us throughout this Liberty 250 series, this is building a case, and it's a justification for what's going on here, and they've got to make the idea catch. They've got to market this idea is what they've got to do.
In a lot of ways, yeah. It's a very long train of abuses, as Jefferson will write. This is not just one disagreement. It's about the idea that power must have limits, and most importantly, power must have the consent of the governed. Without that, power is just abuse. It's one of the things that even today I think many Americans don't understand. The American Revolution was not about taxes. It was not about quartering troops. It was about the idea of the consent of the governed to have that power in place. You can say taxation without representation, but it's really everything without representation. And because of the way the English Constitution is written, developed, the colonies, and it's not just the American colonies, by the way, it's also Canada, it's the Caribbean, it's India, it's anywhere and everywhere that isn't England proper, that belongs to the British Empire, has the same problem, which is that the king, through his ministers, directly administers these colonies. Parliament sets the rules, but the king is actually in charge of it. But it's not one act. As I said, it's a long train of abuses. The king, we've talked about blocking laws, dissolving assemblies. We're going to go down the road to the tavern. He is controlling the judges. He's making his judges dependent upon his will alone and for salary and for their judgment. If you're a judge and you're getting your job because of the king and you're getting paid by the king, what's the odds that you're going to, put your thumb on the scale of justice towards the king? The maintaining of standing armies we talked about, was it last week or week before last? This idea that this is a true anathema to English citizens. You don't maintain standing armies. Taxation without consent. Cutting off trade. This idea that everything had to go through this mercantile empire to England it's strangling us. And of course, this would all lead to the escalation of force and events such as the Boston Massacre and the battles at Lexington and Concord. The willingness of the king to use force to get his point across. These are moments that the Americans, colonialists, see as turning points. This is a colossal shift, if you will, over time. It starts as a disagreement. We disagree with you about these things, but we still raise our glasses and say, God save the king. We still believe in the system of government that we have, and this is something that is remarkable, that this British system still works into the 1770s, and people aren't convinced of that it doesn't. we might debate specific taxes, maybe duties, but we do so within the framework of the government as it's established. But that leads to distrust, which is based in the idea that the leaders that are being inflicted on America are malicious. The Crown actively wants to punish the colonies. We begin to believe that the Crown is actually trying to, punish us for disagreeing with how things are going, with how they're trying to do things. And that leads to this concept then that we're going to make an accusation. Your system is dangerous. It's the realization that the structure itself is designed to oppress us. Much as James II had put into place, you have this long train of abuses leading to the idea that what you are actually trying to do is destroy us. You're trying to oppress us. And because we have no representation in Parliament, we have not consented to these things. You wonder if perhaps they had said, okay, let's give the colonials some representation in Parliament. Maybe this thing goes differently. But they didn't, because the king was not about to give up that authority, that power, that belief that what he was doing was the right thing to do. He understood that he was the right guy. But that led to that accusation, which is written down on those pages of the Declaration of Independence, calling King George III a tyrant.
Well, as you said, Dave, they tried to handle this as British citizens, and they got frustrated when that wasn't working, and it leads us where we go next on WMMB.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
Don't forget, you can preset WMMB, Bill Mick Live, the Florida Roundtable, Dave Does History, What the Frock, all at the top of your iHeartRadio app. Have us right at your fingertips whenever you're ready for us. Dave Bowman with us as we wrap up Dave Does History on a Tuesday morning. So the colonials, at least enough of us to get a Declaration of Independence going, Dave, are convinced that the king is a tyrant. The Brits are on the other side of this, especially the king, who doesn't think he's a tyrant. So let's see where we're going next.
This is what again, you come back to the perfect villain. And even from the British side, we're the perfect villain because we think we're right. Mm-hmm. They believe they're right. The revolution ends up happening because both sides believe that they are defending what is right, but they define liberty differently. The concepts of liberty in Britain are different than they are here. In Britain, the concept of liberty is that Parliament is supreme. And this is something they believe because they've been through the English Revolution, Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, Charles II, James I, James II, the Glorious Revolution. They've built this idea that Parliament has to be supreme. They also believe that empire, which is a mercantilistic empire, it's not a military empire, requires control. And they believe that resistance at any level to any of that is absolute illegal rebellion. On our side of the water, we see things differently. We believe that rights are inherent, that representation must be real, not virtual. And I come back to that over and over again. What if? And there were people in Parliament who said, why don't we give them representation in Parliament? That will solve this whole problem. And you have to wonder if it would have. If Benjamin Franklin and John Adams had been members of Parliament representing America, would things have turned out differently? Government, we also believe.
You would think so, yeah.
It's one of those moments of history, what if? But the king was never going to allow that. We also believe that government requires consent. And this, I think, is probably the heart and soul of the American Revolution. It's not taxes, it's not quartering, it's not even, tea. It's the idea that government must have consent of the governed. It's even in our own documents. sometimes I wonder if we've forgotten that. To that end, though, the American colonists, particularly the patriots, are particularly adept at, I don't like the word, but they're pretty good propagandists. And they are going to focus on George III because, well, frankly, it's easier to oppose a person than a system. Let me say that again in 2026. It's easier to focus hatred, distrust, dislike on a person than it is on a system. In their minds, that turns politics into a moral struggle, and that provides a unification that you wouldn't necessarily have. There's a psychological element to this. The person is infinitely easier to oppose than the entire system, which we seem to like. It's theatrical. It transforms dry tax politics into an epic good versus evil moral struggle. And it's strategic. A single hated face unifies disparate, squabbling colonies and unites them into one. George III believes that he is preserving order. The colonists believe that they're defending liberty. Both can defend their actions, both can justify their actions, and both of them believe that they are absolutely right. This is why George III becomes the perfect villain in our story. Not because he knew he was wrong. He doesn't. He never, to his dying day, thought that he was wrong about what he did with the American colonists. He never imagined that he had done anything wrong. Imagine how hard that would be for someone who believes that he's on the throne because God put him there to do God's work, and that anyone who opposed him was against God. You weren't just against the king, you were opposing God. And imagine the mental gymnastics you have to go through in your mind to rationalize, well then, if God was on our side, why did we lose? How do you rationalize that? Well, in George III's case, something else would come along and cause him not to have to do that. But in the meantime, he never believed that he was wrong. And in his mind to this day, and believe me, in the minds of his biographers who are still writing about him today, he never was wrong. He was the good guy, and it's just American propaganda that makes him the bad guy. Was he the perfect villain? If you're British, maybe you look at this and go, well, he was defending the system. But from our viewpoint, from the American viewpoint, he was clearly oppressing our rights. He was clearly doing things that were not in keeping with the English constitutional system. His rationale was, it didn't apply to us, it only applies in England. So you're part of our English empire, you're benefiting from what's going on, you will do things the way we tell you to do them. We said, no, we've had enough of that. We made him the perfect villain, and we threw off the king.
And we pick it up in 1 minute here on Bill Mick Live. Three, 321-768-1240 if you want in as we wrap up Dave Does History on this Tuesday morning. So, I guess in the eyes of each other, Dave, there were perfect villains on both sides.
In so many ways. Of course, the British never saw us as perfect villains. They just saw us as bad guys, particularly the Patriots, and particularly the king. He had nothing good to say about the American Patriots. In fact, one of his letters that he writes to his ministers is that any means of distressing America must meet with my consent, which is a sentence that you read today and you go, well, it doesn't really sound that vicious. But that, to me, take all the other stuff, if you're willing to go to any means, basically he was saying everything's on the table, there's nothing we won't do to cause America pain, to destroy the Americans, it meets my concurrence in advance. That is the mark of a tyrant. That is the mark of someone who is willing to go beyond the bounds of power to achieve his goals. King George III is an interesting, much like Herod the Great, he suffers from a malady. He suffers from an illness that causes him to go crazy. I mean, he literally just goes bananas. Herod the Great had the same issue. He has a couple of major bouts of this, one of which happens in 1765 before the American Revolution, but they keep that very quiet. The second one happens in 1788, and it's the subject of one of the best movies ever made called The Madness of King George, which you can see on Netflix or wherever, with Nigel Hawthorne. It's a fantastic movie. But it deals with his going crazy. There's no system to remove him from the throne because he's crazy, because he's placed there by God, so obviously God wanted him to be crazy. But they do manage to get him through that. In 1789, something happens in the world, and I was asking Bill this question during the break. Why does the English monarchy still seem so strong today? Because in 1789, 1790, it became the single unifying force in England as they watched what was happening in France with the execution of Louis XVI, with the overthrows of monarchies around the world. They began to see King George III as a stable influence. And despite the fact that he had lost the American colonies, because he was so strong during the French Revolution, the English really rallied around their king. And to this day, he is seen, the crown is still seen as that single unifying force in what's left of the British Empire. All thanks to King George III.
Interesting. Let's get to those phones. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Hey, this is the other guy over in Palm Bay, Florida. But I was wondering, was a lot of the craziness in the family from the blue bloods staying, keeping the blood within the family and stuff? It eventually makes people go like West Virginians, nuts and crazy and stuff. But also, has anybody investigated that? And then is Princess Diane, the first that married from the outside?
Ooh, I don't know about that. Dave, thoughts there?
I'm not sure. The illness that King George III had was it's related. Nobody knows for certain what it is. And God bless me, I can't say it. The name is porphyria, and it's a mental disturbance. It's a neurological and psychiatric exposition. It could have been bipolar. Who knows? Insofar as whether or not this was inbred, I'm going to go with no. The British Crown was usually pretty good about finding princesses from somewhere else. And in fact, George III never even met his wife until their wedding day. But by all accounts, he, unlike any of the other monarchs and his son, George IV, was just absolutely dedicated to his wife. They had 15 children. He loved her dearly, and that's one of the things that comes out in the movie The Madness of King George, is how much he really loved his wife and how dedicated he was to her. George was a farmer. He loved farming. He would have been right at home in the Central Valley, Bill. He loved farming. He was known affectionately as Farmer George. And there you go. I don't know enough about Diana. Here's the thing about relationships. You go back far enough, everybody's related, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I discovered the other day that the person that founded Anacortes, Washington, is related to me. He's like a seventh cousin or something, but his last name is Bowman, but on my mom's side, not on my dad's side. So you go back far enough, everybody's related. I don't know how much this isn't the Habsburgs. This isn't the folks in Austria with the big chins and stuff like that. So the British were pretty good about that.
Very, very good. Preview of where we go next week, Dave?
Well, I'd like to get into some of these elements of the English Constitution and how that affects there, but I haven't really put it together yet. Okay. We're getting close. I mean, we're here in March. We're coming up on April when things are really starting to pick up, where North Carolina is really going to get involved with this. We're a lot closer to the Declaration than maybe it feels like.
That is very interesting. It's going to be fun getting there. We've been doing it for longer than the FCC wanted us to, Dave, which is a good thing.
Yes.
Tomorrow on Bill Mick Live in our 8 o'clock hour, my former and current boss, Ken Holiday, and he even stayed with us when I was in Modesto, which is kind of fun. Nonetheless, Dave Bowman, thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
See you then.
They brand my duty despotism, my caution iron rule. They twist my every action to paint me harsh and cruel. But order is not oppression, it's the price of loyalty. If they reject their sovereign, then the fault's not mine but theirs. They riot over taxes, though theirs were light and few. They spit upon my soldiers, who bled to guard them too. They claim I've closed their justice, that I ignore their pleas. But rebels see injustice in every passing breeze. They speak of rights and freedoms, of nature's sacred laws. But treason wrapped in rhetoric is treason all the same. If they will not be governed, if loyalty has died, then let them taste the consequence of casting me aside. A monarch bears a burden, and mine is now made clear, to answer their defiance with measures they should fear. They call my justice tyranny, my patience royal sin. They break the bond of subjects and claim the right to win. If order breeds rebellion, then rebellion breeds the flame. And I will not show mercy to those who curse my name. So let them raise their banners, let them defy my throne. If peace is now beyond us, then war will be my own. For every act of treason demands a king's response, and every means of breaking them shall earn my full concurrence. A monarch bears a burden, and mine I will not shirk. If they call me tyrant, let them. If they call me cruel, so be it. For I will crush rebellion before I ever flee it. Let history judge my actions. Let nations watch and learn. Defiance has its price, and I grant my full concurrence.